Hi, I'm Noah Bendix-Balgley, speaking to you from Berlin today. I'm very happy for the next in the series of Violin Channel Heroes. And today I'm very happy to speak to my hero and mentor, Mauricio Fuks, who is in Bloomington, Indiana, where he is professor at the Indiana Jacobs School of Music. I studied with Mauricio Fuks for many years, from the age of 13 to about 21, and I'm very happy to still keep in touch with him very regularly for advice and friendship. And I feel personally that he's basically the reason I am who I am as a violinist, as a musician, but also very much as a person. So I'm very thankful for his friendship, his love, and his instruction over the many years. And I thought this would be a nice chance to get to know him a little bit better. For myself, but also for the Violin Channel audience. So first of all, welcome, and great to talk to you today.
Well, it's so nice to see you, and thank you for such lovely introduction, really.
You're welcome, you're welcome. So I wanted to maybe delve a little bit into your career and your life. Of course, I've known you as a pedagogue, as a violin teacher for many years, but you started off your studies at a young age, and you were a successful concert artist for many years, and then you made the switch to devoting yourself completely to violin pedagogy in a very serious way, very thoughtful way over the years. First of all, where were you born? Where did you grow up? And when did you start playing the violin?
Yes, I was born in Montevideo, in Uruguay, and I grew up there. I was in Uruguay until I was 16 years old, and that's when I went to the junior school. But basically, for 16 years, I lived there, and I started to play the violin when I was 6 years old. And the reason I started to play the violin is because one day, I remember we used to have one of those big radios. It looked like a piece of furniture. And my parents would listen to music all day long. And they weren't home, and the radio was on, and I was listening to this violinist. I didn't know who it was, and I went in the back of the of the radio. I hid there because I thought I would listen better. And I listened. I was fascinated. At that time I was learning piano, but I was fascinated with what I was listening. Then my parents came in, they couldn't find me, and I was there. And finally, they found me in the back of the radio, and they told me, because, I don't remember very well, that I was totally mesmerized by what I was listening, and I had tears in my eyes. I was so moved. And then they told me it was Fritz Kreisler playing the Mendelssohn Violin Concerto.
Mm-hmm.
So I told my father, I want to do that. That's what I want to do. And I felt very strongly, really, that I remember, the feeling I remember. And finally, after much insisting, at 6 o'clock, at the age of 6,
Yeah.
he decided to buy me a little violin. And I started the violin at 6. For 3 years, I didn't have a good teacher. I mean, she was very loving, but she was not a very good teacher. And she would play along with me all the time. And I knew I was playing out of tune when she would stop playing and hit me with a ball over the head.
Very subtle.
Then I knew I was playing out of tune. I thought she was playing out of tune. But, she would hit me over the head. Thank God I had hair in those days to protect me. And then I knew. One day, I remember, we were very friendly with the Kronberg family, and the son, Israel, was a very fine violinist. became concertmaster of the American Ballet Theater. I mean, went to the Soviet Union to study. I mean, he was a really fine violinist. And he came, and my father said, why don't you play something for Israel? And I played, and Israel said to my father, listen, he cannot continue like that. You know, he's very talented, but he has too many bad habits. He has to go to my teacher, Ilya Fidlon. He says, well, how do we do that? I will arrange it. So it was arranged, and I played for Ilya Fidlon. And he told my father that he would take me on probation because I was so wild that he didn't know that if he could help me, you know, but he was going to try. Now, Ilya Fidlon was a Russian violinist. He studied in St. Petersburg with Karguyev, who was one of first with Karguyev at the conservatory in St. Petersburg. He studied with Karguyev, and then he went to Auer, and he was actually a classmate of Yasha Haifa. And I remember that I would have one lesson a week, a formal lesson, but he would come to my house every day and would practice for an hour and a half with me. And I was at that time 9 years old. And he had a wonderful way with me because I was, of course, very rebellious, very much of an only child, you know, thought I knew it all. And he would, even at that time, he was not condescending. He would never talk down to me. He would explain something. He would expect me to do it, but it was in a very gentle, loving way. And then he would ask me questions. Do you understand what I'm telling you? What do you think of it? And I was 9 years old. And that has influenced my pedagogy in a way more than anything else, you know, him as a pedagogue. And he would also show me. He was a great violinist, really wonderful violinist who played not just beautifully musically, but with a great deal of facility, effortlessly. And of course, that was a very good picture for me because he expected me to do the same, you see. So anyhow, I stayed with him until I was 16. You know, he would practice with me. He would teach me how to practice. I will never thank him enough for that because when I got into the Juilliard school, I knew how to practice. And, you know, I still believe that you can only be as good as the quality of your practice. And he would do that with me from the beginning. I remember also that he was a very good psychologist. For example, he tried from the beginning to make me play scales and studies, and I was very rebellious. I didn't like to do that. So he didn't get into a fight with me, and he would make his own exercises, and he started to teach me already from the age of 10 and a half, 11, repertoire that incorporated all the things that he wanted me to know. You know, I remember I went through a lot of passages, and he would make, you know, from different concerti. You know, I remember playing in a recital at 11, I played La Luz Symphonie Espagnole, I played Bruch Concerto. At 13, I played Glazunov Concerto. I played Guillaume too. I remember that. And other things. And, he would make exercises out of every passage. So it was wonderful. It was so creative, his teaching. And it made me, at that time I didn't realize it, but it made me begin to think in that way of practicing. And that has influenced my pedagogical work a lot, you know. So I stayed with him. You know, I had the opportunity from the ages of 12 and to play for some wonderful people. I remember playing for David Oistrakh at 12.
When he was touring and performing in Montevideo, and you met him.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And that was a wonderful experience because, first of all, I played with his pianist, with Vladimir Yampolsky, who was a really fantastic pianist. And also he was so lovely and gentle. And I remember him saying to me, I played Mozart A major concerto and Mendelssohn concerto. And he said, "Oh, well, little boy, you played so well. But, you know, two things I have to tell you." Okay. And he said, one thing is that your violin is too low. You know, you should hold your violin proudly. He says, "Have you seen Jascha Heifetz play?" And I said, no, which was true. I had never seen him. I heard him. I would hear him. I mean, we had records of Heifetz throughout the house and other people. And of course, I would hear him every day. But that's one thing he told me. The other thing he told me, and that hurt a bit, he says, you know, you vibrate like an old man, yes, to me. Because I used to have at that time a slow vibrato. You know, I didn't have a fully developed vibrato yet, but my teacher didn't want to push it. He was right. It was very well centered and it wasn't wide, but it was slow. So he told me that I vibrated like an old man. And I remember after playing for him, I went home and put the scroll of the violin against the wall, and I was trying
up on the rafter.
Like a machine gun, you know? And my teacher said, no, don't do that. It'll come, you know. And then at 13, Kogan came to play. They would take me to play for everybody that came, you know. And I went to play for Kogan. And Kogan was a different cup of tea, you know. Kogan was very dry.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember the playing was unbelievable. Both Oistrakh, Kogan, and imagine Oistrakh played 4 recitals, and every recital was full.
And did he play the same program, or he played different programs?
Different programs in every recital, and he even played, I remember, that was the first time I ever heard the Sibelius concerto. And he played it with piano.
And yes. You know, I mean, it must have been an amazing experience to play for them, for people like Oistrakh and Kogan. I'm wondering, you know, how much were you influenced by those recordings and the concerts that you heard of artists like that? Did you feel like, were there particular ones that you wanted to imitate or be like? Yes. Or did your teacher try to steer you your own way? I mean, it must have been with personalities like that. It must have been so influential.
It did not prevent me from listening to different people. You know, his favorite violinist was Heifetz, but of course he admired other violinists too. And I remember after I played for Oistrakh, I listened to so much Oistrakh and I was trying to imitate what Oistrakh did. Then when I played for Kogan, after I played for Kogan, I remember it was shortly after he had won the Queen Elizabeth competition. And I remember having the Paganini concerto recording of his and short pieces, and you know, and I was trying to imitate him. And, you know, I went through different periods of infatuation with different violinists. And as I think back, I think that's good. You know, I tell my students to imitate what they like, you know, because beauty in your playing doesn't happen in a void.
Yeah.
You know, if you like something, you should imitate it. You should learn from the great masters of the golden age of violin playing. You know, I always, you know, I tell them, look, if you go to the great museums in the world, you'll always see art students copying what the great masters painted. And it doesn't mean that they're going to paint that way, but it's a very valuable source of inspiration.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I find, you know, I of course grew up also listening to the greats. You know, I unfortunately didn't get to hear them live, but I remember, you know, I went through an Oistrakh phase and a Milstein phase and Menuhin.
That's right.
And the thing I think that I realized later, I mean, of course, there are things I liked, but later on I realized to try to actually identify exactly what I loved about what they were doing, and then to hear the differences of how Milstein would approach a phrase, or Chrysler, or in terms of sound, colors, Portamenti, to actually try to go in more detailed and identify what were they actually doing, and then you can use that to find your own voice. But not only saying I love how this sounds, but why do I love it? What is it about this that speaks to me?
Well,
And that can get more and more refined as you progress.
Well, that's very interesting. I mean, it's the same process. I don't know if at 12 or
yeah, I think that at that age I didn't think about that
I
yet.
don't know if I
Later on,
myself why I love this. But it was a very instinctive, visceral reaction to the tonal beauty.
mm-hmm.
You know, because all of these people have very definitely, uniquely beautiful tones.
Yeah.
I mean, you could turn on the radio and in one or two notes, you knew who was playing. The personality was so definite and so clear. Whereas today it's more difficult to know who is playing.
Another thing that, you know, if we're talking about a lot of the great old violinists that we grew up idolizing, people like Milstein and Heifetz and Oistrakh, you know, we have this wonderful ability to actually watch people now who didn't get to see them live, to watch videos of them playing. And one thing, you know, I'm always noticing is how efficient they are in their use of their bodies. And that, you know, of course, playing the violin, playing any instrument is a physical, athletic endeavor. And when I watch those players play, I find that there's actually a lot less extraneous movement. And maybe because of the age we live in now, that everything is faster, the attention spans are perhaps are smaller.
Yeah.
There's a lot of emphasis now on movement that may or may not be not helpful. And I was wondering, you know, how did that become a part of your teaching? Because it's such an important part.
I was taught that way. And of course, none of my teachers move the way some people move today. You know, there's a lot of corporal choreography, if you want, that I find unnecessary. I think that the great people that you mentioned, Milstein, Heifetz, Oistrakh, they advocated the simple rule that less is more. You know, they played what you see when you see, you know, and what you hear and what you see is that they play with a minimum of effort. I mean, you saw that in pianists too.
Yeah.
You know, in those days, I remember going to hear Horowitz when he came back in '64. And I mean, once in a while, I knew he was making a crescendo because I could see his left foot moving left. And, you know, and then I could hear this incredible rising of sound, you know, but actually nothing moved. And that was the beauty of it. And so in a way, I think I'm going to give Heifetz as an example, that a minimum of movement, and in the case of Heifetz, that is very obvious, makes violin playing at that level magical, because it's like, you know, you don't see it, you just hear it. And I remember that when I was studying with him, very often I would ask myself, where's it coming from? This incredible phrasing and tone and ability to play everything so gorgeously and yet so effortlessly that you can't actually see it.
It's the magician not giving their tricks away. It's all,
You know, once they asked Leonid Kogan in an interview, said, what do you think? Because everybody knows that he adored Heifetz and imitated him even a bit. And they asked him, what do you think of Heifetz as a violinist? And he said, well, Heifetz is not a violinist. Heifetz is a magician. He said. So I still prefer this way of playing, and I encourage this way of playing also because you last longer as a player physically. Sometimes when you move too much, you're using muscles you don't need to use, and you get very tired. And, you know, over the years, this fatigue turns into pain and problems. So, you know, and the facial choreographies, you know, and I mean, some people take it to such an extent, you know, and maybe that's entertaining to some people. To me, it's not entertaining and totally superfluous. You know, I hope we will go back, you know, to the more elegant way of playing, you know, without, I mean, movement is necessary because movement is life. And you know, when people say, oh, Heifetz didn't move, it's not true. Heifetz moved. You know, if you don't move, you can't play like Heifetz. It's just that he didn't move what he didn't need to move.
Yeah, it was always very specifically helping him play the way he wanted to play, make music how he wanted to make music.
Exactly. He was completely in what he wanted to say with the violin. You know.
So I'm going to jump back a little bit to your career, your biography. So you studied at Juilliard, and then you embarked on a concert career. You won the Young Concert Artist. You were performing a lot.
Yes.
I was wondering a couple of things. First of all, if you have any particularly fond memories or pieces that you love to play most as a soloist or recitalist. And then if you can speak a little bit about your transition from there into pedagogy. How did you start teaching? Was that a difficult transition to make? You already talked about the influences from Fiedlon, which I think are very strong, and I recognize in the instruction I've seen that you gave me, but also in many master classes. What were the other things that helped you get your start as a pedagogue, as a violin teacher?
Yes, it's well, you know, my years at Juilliard were extremely important. Psychologically, you know, in Uruguay, I was the only young kid that could play at that level. And that was fine. but you can't grow being the only one.
Yeah, yeah. Need a bigger
And
pond.
you need to have colleagues that can play. In the case of Julia, that played on a high level. Some of them played better than me.
Yeah. Mm. For
And
inspiration
that
and challenge.
was very important because I learned from listening to others too that played better than me. And you learn to be critical, discerning, and also, constructive in criticism. That you always, if somebody is really good, yes, you can find something that needs improvement, but you have to admire the person for being that good. Yeah. So, and then I played concerts in South America for 2 years all over. I played as a soloist, I played chamber music, I played, many things. Then I needed to come back to this country, but I needed to have a job. And so I played with Donald Johannes, the Prokofiev D major. And he said to me, "What are you doing?" I said, "Well, I don't know." I said, "I would like to go back to the States, but I need to have a job to go back to the States, and I don't have a job." He says, "Look," and he was the conductor of the Dallas Symphony at that time.
Mm-hmm.
He says, "We have an associate concertmaster position available." They invited me to be the associate concertmaster, and that's the job I needed to go back. So I went back,
yeah,
and and I became the associate concertmaster of Dallas. And during that year, I went to visit my dear friend Paul Rosenthal, who was in Los Angeles studying with Mr. Heifetz. And I met Mr. Heifetz, and he told me, "Would you like to audition for me to come to the class in April?" So I went, of course, that's, I worshipped that man, and to think of having the opportunity to play for him and to be inspired by him was, of course, almost a dream come true. So I went to audition for him, and that audition was so funny. And he's dressed so elegantly and wonderful. He says, "Please come in." It's very nice. And he took me in the back to that wonderful studio, famous studio of his. And I remember him going back saying, play a scale. And I knew I was going to play Brahms concerto for him. So I said, "What scale?" I said, "Mr. Heifetz." He says, "I like them all." So I said, "Well, I play D major," because, I was going to play. And they told me, Paul warned me, "Don't play very fast, play at a moderate tempo. He doesn't like to hear fast scale." And so I played arpeggios, and then he said thirds and sixths and octave, finger octave, tenths. And after I finished, he said, "Well, I see you practice your scales. Now let's hear what you have to play for me." So I said, "I would like to play the Brahms." And he said to me, "The Brahms what?" And he was right, because Brahms wrote many things.
Many things, yeah.
He had a very dry but funny sense of humor. And I played Brahms concerto, I remember, and he invited the pianist in. And I remember that before I played, he started beating with his, with his pencil, and he went, which was faster than I was prepared to play. But I had to play it at his tempo. And I remember I played, I don't know, at least the whole introduction, uh, for 4 or 5 pages. Then he asked me to play some of the second movement and some of the third movement. And then he asked me, he says, do you have an itsy bitsy? I didn't know then what that meant. And that meant
meant
a
a
small
small
piece.
piece, or?
Yeah, small piece. So I said, well, I have the Chrysler version of I Palpiti of Paganini. And he says, all right, play the double harmonics.
Cut to the chase.
Yeah, he wasn't interested in hearing the rest. I don't know why. But he said, play the double harmonics. And in those days, I was playing concert, I was in good shape. And I think modestly apart that I played them very well. And when I stopped playing this variation, he says, he looked at me with a smile. He didn't smile very often, but he smiled. And he said to me, you should never worry about double harmonics or harmonics. And I looked at him and I said, oh, inside I was thinking, so why do you ask me to play them, And he says, I said, oh yes, why, Mr. Heifetz? He says, because, it's very simple. Some days they come out and some days they don't. So, and that was the lesson on harmonics.
Double harmonics, yeah.
Yeah. And then, of course, he invited me to come and full scholarship and everything. And of course, I went. But one of the things that stayed with me is that he looked out of the window and there was so much smog in those days in Los Angeles.
Mm-hmm.
And he says, you see that? That is terrible. That kills people. He says, when I first came here, you could see as far as Mexico. Well, it's an exaggeration, but it was clean, But he was very much aware of the environment. He had an electric car and everything,
No.
He, before the times of environmental awareness.
Yeah, this is many years.
Really. It was, yes, it was admirable, really. And so I went to study with him. I spent a year with him. And of course, it was wonderful in the sense that I learned a lot from what he said to the other students. Also, he was still playing marvelously beautifully. And so from hearing him play, I learned a lot from playing quartets with him. I learned a lot from, from playing duos with him. I remember once he asked me to play duos with him, and he put up the Spohr duos, which are very hard to read. And my God, it was wonderful because I was standing on his left and I was taller than him, and I had such a good view of his of his left hand. And I never saw something so beautiful in my life. And then I really saw why he was so secure when he slid. And the way he slid, the Heifetz slides are unique,
Yeah.
And I noticed that he would never get to the note with lifting the finger that was on the string, that the finger that was on the string always stayed. And he would lift it when he would get to the note. So he always had support. You see? Yeah, I noticed that, but he never told me. It was all visual, and hearing him, it was a marvelous experience. Perhaps too seductive, if I can say, because when you hear that, a meter or less away from you, maybe unconsciously, you begin to think that there's no other way to play the violin
Uh-huh.
or to play music, you know. So it took me a good year and a half after I left them to find myself again,
Mm-hmm.
to realize that, yes, there are other ways, and to go through a digestive process, especially of elimination, where I was, you know, I could eliminate the things that are not, that you cannot use for your own playing because they are so uniquely individual.
That he did.
And also, you know, to remain with the things that made his playing so marvelous, so strong, you know, the sense of rhythm, you know, the colors, and you know, the sense of phrasing, things like that, you know. So I'm glad that I went through that and found myself, for better or for worse,
Mm-hmm.
you know. And then I started, you know, I went back to New York. I started, you know, I played concerts. I also did little jobs, you know, you know, I mean, even gigs, you know, like recordings and stuff
Yeah.
like that, commercial recordings. And that teaches you a lot too. And you know, to support myself. But I noticed already in New York that I was having problems of a lot of pain in my back, in my neck, and I knew that I had a condition that was congenital, you
Mm-hmm.
know, stenosis and, um, you know, this disease. I mean, both my parents had that.
Yeah.
So I was born with that. But over the years, you know, playing the violin didn't help it.
Mm.
So I already began to think, well, maybe I don't know how much longer I can go on like this. And I went to Montreal, you know, to visit a friend, and I loved it so much that I decided to move from New York to Montreal, you know, and became a Canadian resident, eventually a citizen. I'm still a Canadian citizen. And I had my first back operation then. Imagine, it didn't cost me a thing, you know, and I was in the process of getting my residence. And so I went to Montreal and I played in the symphony. I was, audition. I needed a job, and I got the associate concertmaster position in the symphony. Wonderful symphony orchestra. Great players. And then I decided after 2 years that, you know, it was best if I would stop playing because it was tiring. It was tiring me, you know. And I got a job my last year in the symphony. I got a job teaching part-time at McGill University. And I remember every Thursday I would teach for 6 hours at McGill University. And after that, they offered me a full-time job. And of course, I accepted the full-time job, which came in very handy because I had met Violin, my wife, whom you know very well, and I wanted to get married. And so it came in, you know, very, very handy. And I stayed teaching at McGill for 21 years.
Yeah, until you went to Bloomington. Yeah.
Yeah, until I went to Bloomington in 95. Yeah, and I've been here since 95. And that's when I met you.
Yeah, I guess shortly after, because
Shortly after, yes,
I came to study in '97. I was 13 years old.
that's
And
right.
to play
You
for you.
came from Oakland, I
Exactly.
remember.
I'd been out in California. I came to play for you. I played Brook Concerto, and I can't remember what else. I think I played you one of my
Oh
companies.
no, the first, no, I will tell you because I remember it very well.
Exactly.
The first thing you played was the Sicilian from the G minor sonata by Bach.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
That was the first thing you played. Then, and of course, it was very expressive, but all wrong, but it was very, very expressive. Then I said, play a little Bruch concerto, which you would play now with the Berlin Philharmonic, and you play it better than then. And
I
and
certainly hope so. We'll see.
and also it was the same thing. And then I said, I remember I was there, and Raquel Castro, my assistant, was there too, listening. And I kept your mother outside the room. I didn't want her in the room. I said, I'll talk to you later. And then I said, well, do you have anything else? And you said, yes, I composed some pieces. And you played some of your pieces for me. And that was, in a way, what decided me to teach you.
Mm.
Because when your mother asked me, she was so worried, are you going to take him? Are you going to take him? And I was very honest with her. I said, look, I will take him on probation, violinistically speaking. I said, because, he has so many bad habits. I don't know how much I can do for him, but I'll try my best.
So do
He
you
will
didn't know whether it was beyond any hope?
yeah, not quite, and I said, I will work with him, and Raquel Castro will work with him every week too. She will practice with him. I said, but I want you to know one thing is for sure. Your son is a musician, and he should be in music. I told her that. Maybe as a violinist, but if not, as a composer, as a conductor, there are many things one can do in music. I said to her, so I'm going to try. Well, I remember how marvelously you would take lessons at that age. Your concentration was so out of the ordinary for somebody 13 that even when I asked you to play open strings or very simple things like that, you had total concentration, and you did it with complete commitment. You weren't not asking me, when am I going to play a piece?
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, when I look back, I don't think it was so easy for me because, of course, when I wanted to be playing Mendelssohn Concerto and
Yeah,
Tchaikovsky Concerto and things. But it's interesting when hearing you talk about your teacher Violin and how he from the very beginning was patient and basically treated you already as an
yes,
adult in terms, and that's how I felt at the time, was that even though we were doing technical work from the beginning, from the ground up, starting with open strings and then etudes, Stradiak, Kreutz,
yeah,
that the approach was always that you always treated me as a full participant, as a full
yes.
person, and
And
not
that's
something
part,
as a kid.
yeah, and that's part of one of the things that I believe is very important in teaching, is in teaching in general, in pedagogy as an art, is to teach, to involve people, not to make them participants, to have active students, because I think good teaching is to make people able to think for themselves. And, and I practice that from the first day I teach somebody. Even if I'm teaching open strings, it doesn't matter. Oh no, with a guy that's playing the Paganini caprices, then of course I involve him. No, 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 no.
No, for everybody, yeah.
It's part of that. It's very important, to teach them how to think, and of course, in your case, it was so obvious. I mean, you were so intelligent and so receptive at 13. That was incredible. And I remember that after a year and a half, you were playing Scherzo Tarantella. I don't know if you remember that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But along the way, there are always the very, very selectively chosen Chrysler pieces.
And you were playing very well, but you did something a little out of the ordinary, and I didn't stop you, of course. And then when you stopped playing it, when you finished the piece, I said, "Oh, Noah," I said, "you did something so interesting here. How come?" And you said, "Well, I love that modulation." And that was wonderful. I said, "Well, of course, it's wonderful, and I don't blame you, but don't do it because it's not appropriate." you know, you know. But I remember that. I mean, you had such wonderful ear. You still do. And yes, I remember those things. When I think of teaching sometimes, people, because when I teach, I'm just teaching. I'm dealing with the task at hand, and I'm not thinking, well, what am I doing? What am I applying now? A lot of teaching is like playing in a way. A lot of it is based on reaction too. And the reason that so much is based on reaction is because I think that you teach people before you teach the violin.
Yeah. And that's, I think, something that I find so much about your approach to teaching is also approach to, people. It's not just simply about the violin. It's about the people that come to your studio and how their time with you is not simply just learning to play the violin better, but growing artistically, growing in their heart and their minds.
Yes, many things.
How it goes
Yes.
into the music too.
Yes, because some things, sometimes you can teach something and it doesn't come and it doesn't come. And all of a sudden, a year or two after it comes, and it came with life because the person had an existential experience that influenced him or her, that made them do something. You have to teach people because it's about motivation.
Yeah.
And if you can't get out of yourself as a teacher, and put yourself in the sensations of the student, with physical, emotional, intellectual, all of that, it's very hard to motivate. Sometimes a student has a problem, and you say, well, he shouldn't have the problem because he has the technique to play this. And it's because the problem is more mental
than
physical.
more technical.
You see? And if the mind is not thinking positively, constructively, it can also, distract.
Mm.
And that's why the pupil cannot play that passage well. So you have to encourage the pupil to understand that he can play it, that objectively he's good enough to play it. In other words, to think positively. I always say that charity starts at home,
Yeah.
and that first you have to love yourself in what you do. And if you don't love yourself or what you do, others will not love it too.
Mm.
So it's a global thing. You can't just teach the violin, well, playing tune, this is how you make a good tone, this is how you bow, you pull the bow, you push the bow, that's not enough. That's not enough. Yes, the artisanal part, let's say the athletic part of playing the violin, is very, very important, because let's face it, you're going to have to express it with the body.
Yeah, tools need to express what you want to have.
Yeah, I mean, there's no escaping that. But what you do with the body is intimately connected to your emotions. Body language. Body language. And so you cannot ignore that. However, I insist very much on technical competence. You can never have enough technique.
Yeah. Well, and I think also you make very clear that it's never technique just for the sake of technique. The technique is,
of course,
is
not
always serving the music, and that actually the two are always intertwined. It's not possible.
Absolutely. And the word technique.
Together. Yeah.
Yeah. And absolutely right, Noah. And the word technique proves that, because the word technique comes from the old Greek technika, and technika meant art.
Yeah.
You see, work more with your inner voice than with your outer voice. What do you want to express? Sometimes technique, at this point, when you can play so well already, you can play every piece, you can play the violin very well, you're not going to make more progress from another scale or another etude or another marvelous exercise. No. What you're going to make more progress from trying to satisfy your emotional artistic needs.
Mm-hmm. If there's something that you has to be expressed through the music, and that then you develop the technical skills to
yes, but you have to contact there.
Yeah, there has to be that need there before.
Yeah. And I remember when when we started working, I would make you sing, I would make you dance.
I remember you had me practicing. You wanted me to practice Dvorak concerto in the dark. You wanted me to go practice it and turn off the lights and just play it. And get more, which was very effective. Yeah.
Yes, and yes, and that's why I tell some students to close their eyes. I said, they always look at what they're doing. I said, what are you looking at? Maybe you're being mesmerized by your left hand or something. I don't know. I said, there's nothing there. It's not a guitar. There are no frets. What are you looking at? I said, close your eyes. I said, when we close our eyes, we are not blind. We're looking inside. And that's where the truth is. It's inside, not outside of you. And that's where you have to go deeper and deeper and deeper for the rest of your life. And I assure you that you will find things you don't like. But you can dispose of that. It's better to know what you don't like than not to know what you don't like. So then the playing begins to live. When you start to look inside and you start to when you start to fuse the two voices, because a lot of people have a lovely external voice, but it's a bit empty. And it's because it's not fused with the internal voice. And, we are singers. We must play the violin as if the voice is coming from inside of us, not from outside of us. And a musician to me, a musician to me is a singer. Even if he's a timpani player, he will play better if he's a singer.
And that connection, I mean, that you speak from the inner voice, that you're able to bring that out through the technical means that you've mastered on the instrument, and that connection is happening in a seamless, natural way. I think
Absolutely.
that's what we strive for, that this ease, this sort of flow, that there's no stopping point because of any sort of either technical or psychological
Yes,
whatever, that it's able to flow directly from the inner voice out through the instrument, through the sound, and then reach the world, the audience, is what we strive
of course. It's the only way that you can play in a compelling way artistically,
for. Mm.
because 96% of the audience listens at that level. The reaction is visceral in the gut.
Yeah.
They don't know if you played maybe the F sharp a little too low or the C a little too high, or if a sound was perhaps not completely well, produced. They don't know that. They don't care about that.
But they know whether it speaks to them, whether they have that
Yes,
reaction.
exactly. And that's what's important. If you speak to them, they're going to pay to hear you again. If you don't speak to them, they're not going to pay to hear you again. And you'll have a very short career.
Well, and I think also, I mean, especially in these times, it's so important that we really speak when we have that opportunity, that we don't lose that opportunity to share the beauty, the emotion, the
Yes,
wisdom of
because,
the music.
I don't know if you remember when you play concerts, because I still say the same thing sometimes, to everybody. Before a concert, they look at me and they're like, they're hoping for words of wisdom that is, that is going to make them play their best. I said, you know what I want you to do tonight? Maybe, most of them play. I said, I want you to go out there and play with love.
Yeah.
I said, you play music because you love music, right? Yes, right. So the love is more complete when you share it with someone.
Mm-hmm.
And you're going to share it, think you're sharing it with 3,000 people. We need love. We need more and more love in the world. The love can move mountains, and it's a wonderful thing to be in, an artist, a performer, an instrumentalist that can share love with the audience playing music. It's a privilege, actually. I always tell my students, you are very privileged. Don't forget how many people put food on the table, working 8 and 10 and 12 hours doing things they don't like.
Yeah.
You are going to put food on the table for you and hopefully your family, your children, doing something you love. I said, I don't want you to ever forget that, how privileged you are.
Well, I think I'm going to wrap up, but I want to thank you so much for your telling us about your career, your life, your teaching, and also just thank you myself for the wonderful friendship, the instruction through my time studying with you, but also just through life, and that's something that I'm so happy to have.
Well,
forever.
Noah, it's reciprocal. It's a privilege to me, to be your teacher, to have taught you for so many years and still be your teacher. I mean, I think our teachers are teachers for life.
Exactly. Yeah.
And also now for you to be my young colleague and my friend. And that is just absolutely beautiful. I'm very proud of you, of course, and I'm very privileged to have you in my life. You, your wife, and now your son Ari.
Exactly.
By the way, I hope he will study with me, right?
Well, in a couple of years. He's a little young. He's 15 months now, but we'll talk about it soon.
Okay, but listen, it's
you.
been wonderful.
Yeah.
Okay, and I hope to see you as soon as we are able to travel.
Yeah.
As soon as possible. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you very much.